Good evening. This is Mae Brussell. It's broadcast number 682, December 31st, 1984. A few more hours, and this year will be tucked away. I've saved articles for the past few years on legal repressions. Those are laws or changes that could come about if the administration wanted to do it at any particular time. The fact that they haven't used those means of suppressing our liberties doesn't mean that they haven't thought about it. They're available, and I'll update some of those for you on another broadcast. I want to thank you for sending money to the station. We had difficulty with the equipment. I made the request, and after 1 week, I wondered if I was getting too discouraged because there wasn't any help from outside people with the exception of one person. But in the past week, many of you have sent in a large amount of money to Kazoo. They're very appreciative, and I thought it was appropriate because of the nature of this material and the opportunity we have to share it with other people that my listeners should give a sizable amount to show that they appreciate that kind of news, and they did come through. I haven't come to a conclusion as to whether just cut off broadcasts and write a book this year or articles. I'm waiting and getting a lot of feedback from the suggestions or questions I asked, and I appreciate your answers and calls. Right now, the broadcast will go on as they are every week, coming out with the news of the week, and I will be trying to write a few hours each day. I'm going to cut down on the telephone calls and not take calls day and night that are here for no particular reason except conversation. Unless there's something of utmost importance, I'm going to limit those calls to friends and family and longtime researchers and not be available for so many people all during the day. I'm not going to answer mail. I answered a few letters and didn't fill in the request for sheets that go with the broadcast. I'm not going to make those available. The sheets accompany the tape cassettes, and I'm not going to be stuffing envelopes anymore on Tuesday and Wednesday or mail that comes for large numbers of sheets at any price. Whatever the cost is for printing, it doesn't cover the time it takes to open the mail and to pull out those sheets. So I'm not going to send those out, and I'm only going to answer mail. If you want an answer from me, if you have sent some material or packages or books, send a postcard with your address on it. I don't mind putting the stamp on it, but I don't want to spend the time addressing it. And I'll just say it was received, thank you, and have a postcard ready or an envelope if you want something in it, but not reprints of articles or copies. I can't provide that service for everybody all the time, and so I'm going to cut that down. Unless you are hard researchers, you know which ones are, you yourself know, and are supplying information and using information, writing books, attorneys, writing magazine articles, people that are, accumulating information to be used for some purpose. The doors, of course, are open for that, but outside of that, I'm going to cut the correspondence and the talking right down to the bone, and that way maybe I can write and do the radio work at the same time if I cut that personal time, and this is what I'm going to try to do. Now, last year when I wrote the story on the Korean airline for Larry Flint for Rebel magazine, I had to draw a picture I designed of the Larry McDonald pie with a picture of Larry McDonald in the center. And then there were various elements that pertained to Larry McDonald's life because the theme of the article was the importance of this particular character. It was down at that time. And while I was only writing about the airline, the Korean airline, and the response of the pilots and the necessity for Larry McDonald to testify in Los Angeles with the lawsuit, the ACLU suit representing 130 plaintiffs against the Los Angeles Police Department, I wanted to explain the parts of Larry McDonald, or some of them, 7 different parts of him, so that the Korean airline story fit in with those others with the police spying, but it also fit in with the national computers that go to Germany and Vienna with past Nazis. They still may be present Nazis, I don't know. And the links in Atlanta, Georgia, of his contacts and supporters to the murder of John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, or associations with data banks and intelligence digests such as John Reese gets out, and Nazis from Germany who worked with Senator Joe McCarthy and then Louise Reese, whose husband was working with Western goals, working for Senator Joe McCarthy. And I have, as I say, this piece of a pie so that when you talk about Larry McDonald, you know that he taps all these various bases, and you can't write a story and just isolate one incident without making it available, how important that particular person is in terms of a lot of other relationships that are ongoing at the same time. Now, along the Larry McDonald pie, I've drawn for you for a nice New Year's present, because you're so sweet. I didn't send out Christmas cards. What I call the history puzzle that fits together. It's the same idea, and there are pieces of the puzzle here that have taken me many years to figure out, and there are other researchers who have come to the same conclusions as these. I didn't leave much space here for other pieces to be added, but we'll do an updated puzzle in 1985 at the end of the year. But by the end of this year, 1984, and I completed 21 years of research into the murder of John Kennedy, I came across all these other sections of the pieces of puzzle before I was satisfied to really begin to write a book, and that's why I felt it was time to write a book this year. And I have never been under the pressure to do it because I wanted to understand the whole process by which assassinations take place, how they're covered up, how they're financed, what the goals were, what preceded it, what's happening now. And I feel very satisfied. This has been a good year and it's a bad year for news, but it's a good year for me because my quest seems to fit together, and it fits to other people doing research and other people writing books and studying the same problem from different approaches. Eventually, I think our story all fits together, and all the books that I have on the assassination or other conspiracies fall into these categories. And I listed here, you can read the sheet that accompanies the broadcast, but for those of you who hear this on the air, I listed some of the major categories that go into controlling our world. The purpose of killing John Kennedy wasn't because he happened to be Catholic. The purpose was much larger, and the fear that he would have peace with the Soviet Union, that he might pull back out of the war in Southeast Asia, which was important to the system, his nuclear test ban treaty, fighting up against NASA and the powers that be there, or the oil depletion allowances, or the anger of the South, and the racists because he wanted to educate the blacks and integrate into the school system. There were a lot of reasons to kill John Kennedy, and in studying John Kennedy's life and the people behind killing him, the various factions fit into this framework too. Basically, the categories are the think tanks, and I'll run those down for you, the types. This isn't inclusive of all think tanks, but the type. The deposed refugees, the rulers who are no longer wanted in their particular countries, the United States and British intelligence that combined with the Vatican spy network during the war and after the war, the Vatican sovereign military, Knights of Malta, the Order of Malta, the oldest piece of this puzzle, going back to the year 1000. This is a continuation of what is known as the Inquisition mentality. The London Times had a long article several weeks ago on the Vatican now and finding the free world and the underprivileged or other people around them, and asked the question, is this the Inquisition, or stating it is the Inquisition. And the policies of the Vatican have been continuous since the year 1000, but they're becoming very apparent right now. The World Anti-Communist League was something born out after the last war that has the deposed refugees and rulers as members of that group and past Nazis, but it also has some new people like Reverend Moon and Mr. Sasakawa, and very powerful people in the combine of rabid anti-fascists and narcotics, and working with the political heads of the various countries. There's the utilization of veterans who lost a few wars. The Germans that lost their war, the Japanese that lost their war, the Americans, General Patton's boys and General Clark's boys who wanted to fight Russia as soon as the war was over. They weren't allowed to do that. The Vietnam veterans and the South Korean vets who didn't get to use the nuclear bomb over there that the various military officials wanted. the anti-Castro Cubans that didn't succeed after the Bay of Pigs. And again, these people mingle with mafia and military together. The little armies are very important. These are some of the biggest stories now that I want to share with you later and through this year. The special forces, the private military teams that will act when Congress doesn't want a war, when you have your 50 states voting for your members of Congress and they don't want a war, then the little armies will give you the war anyway. These are the special forces, the Green Berets, the Nazi setup in North Carolina made by General Franz Albert Sykes, Hitler's army, and Otto Skorzeny. The SEALs, the Navy SEALs, the Rangers, those are the Black Berets. There's 20,000 of them waiting to fight anywhere now. They use Grenada as a testing place to see the reaction of people in America to their coming in and just simply grabbing and taking over a country. There's the Money Tree Foundations that work with the think tanks. They're covers for spreading money. They don't necessarily make policies such as the think tanks. Along the think tank lines, I've listed a few like the Heritage Foundation, the Anderson Fund, the Stanford University, the Hoover Institute on Peace, War, and Revolution, the American Leadership Foundation, the Georgetown Center, Coalition of Peace Through Strength, the Rockefeller Funds, the Institute for Strategic Trade. Those are just a few ideas of the think tanks around. This just a sample. The Money Tree Foundations are groups exposed in the late 60s and are still operating that put in money from various well-known names, people, funds, special funds, and then that is where the CIA draws their money out of to do their actions and activities all over the world. The Dreyfus Fund, the Kaplan Fund, the Union of Bishops of Orthodox Church outside Russia, the American Friends of the Middle East, the Baird Foundation, the Hobby Foundation, Jones O'Donnell, the Brown Foundation, CIA, defense money, Defense Industry Security Command money. Those funds go from the money tree. They get shaken down from the money tree. Congress allocates a few, well, now it's quite a few $1 billion in spy money, and they just don't write checks from the CIA, so they put it through various foundations so that it looks like people are working on causes, writers, lawyers, labor leaders, newscasters. It looks like they're working on particular jobs, but their money comes shaking from this money tree. Then there's a corporate role that has arrangements for coups. They alter elections, they control the resources, and mostly their role is not only the spying, but the making of profit. And you make profit by giving lower wages, which reduces itself to slavery, moving factories overseas where we don't keep track of what pay is given to those laborers. This has to do with the monopoly of patents, resources, minerals, energy, oil. Corporations like ITT, General Motors, Dow Chemical, Ford Motor Company, Bunge Corporation, Lockheed, the American Medical Association that has to do with health matters, communications. Those are the large newspaper chains, the radio and the TV. The money people in the media business and the weapon production, of course, the Rockwells and the Lockheed, Northrop, the manufacturing of weapons is a big profitable matter, and the Fortune 400 has quite a few of those people and their families, and then there's the giant mergers. Another important part of this picture is mafia and drug connections, and I might say in going into these various pieces of this puzzle that the reason they're important, and I tried to summarize conclusions of work I've done in the past 21 years, is that specific people that you see in the news jump into all these other areas. They all fit together. They're not separate. So when you talk about mafia and drug connections, you get up to the Knights of Malta or the Vatican, or through the think tanks, or through the deposed refugees, whether it's the family of the Shah of Iran, and you get into the OSS CIA spy network. But the mafia and drug connections is very important because of the tremendous profit in growing poppies, hashish, and heroin, and the cocaine. The incorporation of the Italian mafia into the intelligence and Pentagon plans was a major step in making sure that huge profits for guns for this fascism, this future fascism, come from the selling of narcotics, and also the narcotic people can hit and provide kill teams such as Sam Giancana or Carlos Marcello Santo Trafficante, John Rosselli, working for Robert Mayhew and the CIA, which is the intelligence apparatus working under the guise of a used aircraft. So the mafia team, when we brought in Mr. Genovese, took him out of jail in New York, a part of that Murder Incorporated and a crime gang, and sent him to Sicily. And Michael Sindona was working with Mr. Montini, the Secretary of the Vatican, who became Pope Paul VI. And the connection of the drugs in Milan goes back to that particular combine. Then the growth of the crime family turf in the United States after 1957. And following that, the Southeast Asian War, the import of Chinese from Taiwan and Japan, and the South Korea element of the Asian drug connections linked to Reverend Moon, as I say, Mr. Ryoshi Sasakawa. They make armaments, they're into drug dealing. There's the Asian and the Middle East out of Turkey and Lebanon, and the valleys, where the Bekaa Valley, where Israel gets their drugs to buy guns, Iran, and then the Marseille connections, and then down to South America and Bolivia, where the combine grew to melt with the Nazis and the CIA, and into Australia to the Nugan Hand Bank, and over to places like Hawaii with the Rewald Public Relations Office. So the mafia drug connections are important. They're important to work with the money tree foundations, with the corporate role, with the private armies. See, a private army, the combination of the 5 branches of armies, could go into Grenada, overthrow the country for supposedly political reasons because of Marxism down there. But the fellow who ran the country, Sir Eric Gary, was part of the international group that had contacts with, if not dealing with, nightclub people. That was his job originally as a nightclub operator, and he was deposed there when Maurice Bishop came in, and now he's back ready, and soon the island might be safe for Robert Vesco to invest and start putting money that he has into drug traffic. So the little armies, the Green Berets, the Rangers, the Special Forces, the SEALs, and Marines all go in, and then they clean out the island and make it safe for drug dealing, which was the goal of the invasion of the Bay of Pigs, to put back Batista, where there was a lot of gambling and prostitution and narcotics traffic in Cuba. Castro as an enemy, he threw them all out. The army, the political heads, the corporations, whether it's Baron Hilton with a hotel in Cuba, or the investment bankers, the people who own the agriculture, the sugar crops, or whatever, want that country or any country that they set their eyes on. The armies go in and get it for them, and a big role in that is the mafia and the drug connections. Then there is the religious connection, the religious right that is very strong. It's always been in this country, but it got well started with the early time of Reagan, and it became much more visible to the extent that it really frightened people at the GOP convention in Dallas in 1984, where they were writing the platform for this present administration and want to fill it with Christian believers, which is actually against the Constitution. And their goal, of course, set aside about 12 years ago, was $22 billion at the time to turn the entire world Christian. So the religious right has people such as Jerry Falwell, the Christian Broadcast Network, Pat Roberts, Reinhard Gehlen's religion. When he left the BND and retired, he went into religion. Jerry Falwell's importance with the administration. And then he isn't just a religious right. He's with the Defense Department making policies and nuclear policies that would bring on the Armageddon. And there's money for television and Christ, politics and Christ, refugees like the International Rescue Committee with Leo Chern, or World Vision, sending money to feed people if they will turn Christian, and if they don't, we turn back and turn our backs on them. The Christian right provides the cause for the armies to do the fighting, and the money is channeled through the various foundations and think tanks to the foot soldiers who will overthrow countries to make sure that eventually, after the little countries are completely covered, they will take on the big bear, which is the Soviet Union. Now, there's the wild ones that appear crazy, but are funded by the CIA, the Defense Department. They're approved by the FBI. They're protected by the judges, the police, district attorneys, the prison guards, the parole people. Those are the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan were based after a group called the Cagoulards in France. The Bouviers were related and linked to the Cagoulards. That's the hooded ones. That's the Ku Klux Klan, the National Alliance, the American Nazi Party, Identity, the Christian Defense League, the Posse Comitatus, the White American Bastion, the Order, the Silent Brotherhood, the Church of Jesus Christ, Christian Aryan Nations that I've been talking about, the Aryan Brotherhood inside the prisons, the secret army organization, working with people in the prison, some being allowed to go out on the condition they kill another person. This is a fact. I've talked to people in the prisons who had that as term of their being allowed to leave the prison. And these people appear crazy, and we'll go into more detail in a few minutes, if I have time, on their interrelationship to each other in the United States, in Canada, over in Europe, internationally. And they're always called the neo-Nazis. But their mentors and their funds and their training comes from people who worked with Adolf Hitler, who are Nazis. The new ones may be the neos, but the old ones are Nazis, and they're still helping these people. Another part of this puzzle are the banks. The banking system is important. This is what makes everything hold together for a few people who know the tricks. If you read the Fortune 500 or the Forbes magazine, you get a pretty good idea of those people that have the savvy. And of course, one of the biggies in this is Chase Manhattan, also the Bank of International Settlements. And the way of manipulating this money for coups, for the Nazi, Fourth Reich, for the takeover, was to set up these secret Swiss accounts in Bern and in Zurich and other cities in Switzerland. They put the money away and hope to return the deposed monarchs, and many of them, such as Juan Perón and Mr. Trujillo from the Dominican Republic, they sold away hundreds of millions of dollars over there. The president of Mexico, former president of Mexico. So this money is salted away, and also there's offshore banking, the Netherlands Antilles, the Cayman Islands, the Bahamas, Panama. There are dummy fronts with doorknobs on them that register certain companies, and that money is salted away for those people that feel something's going to come crashing down on and they want their bucks. And then there's one more category here. I don't say finally because there's some things missing, but this is a pretty good outline of the way these various segments fit together, the law firms that make it possible. When John Kennedy was killed, because this was the major coup in this country, the drastic change of power when the head of the president was blown off, they don't find the assassin. People like Louis Nizer from his well-known law office write the introduction of the Warren Report, and David Bellin and a team of CIA lawyers write a book that is totally false. They don't want to know the assassin. They produce a patsy and stand by the chosen patsy. They write corporate law for a few people. They ignore the criminals. They're out, and if team members of theirs commit crimes, whether it's a Dan White or Mr. DeLorean or Edwin Meese or Donovan, they look the other way and have very weak investigations. There's some offices I've cited here. One is Williams, Connolly, and Califano. Califano's close links to the overthrow of Grenada and also Knights of Malta, and it was a Catholic hospital down there. This is one office I mentioned. Sullivan and Cromwell, the famous office of John Foster Dulles, Allen Dulles, and used for a lot of spying and for Chase Manhattan and a lot of other corporate mischief that has gotten us into the problems we have today. Milbank, Tweed, Hadley, and McCloy. John J. McCloy was in that office and used false law degrees for agents of the CIA. He was on the Warren Commission, and Allen Dulles of Sullivan and Cromwell was also on the Warren Commission. Cravath, Swain, Moore is another law firm, well-known law firm. Couder Brothers represented the Rockefellers and still does in many ways. And I listed Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison as another kind of law office. Now, all these categories and the subjects below are simply samples of there are many, many names that fit into these categories, but these are the basic problems that we researchers are dealing with today, and it gets very complicated, and all of us have to cross-file 2 or 3 or 4 times to put these people in their proper place. But as I say, there's the think tanks, there's the deposed refugees. Did I mention those? The rulers who no longer wanted, the czarists that had pogroms, excessive pogroms, that were kicked out, that joined the Vaslov's army and the Solidarists, the Hungarians, the Cubans, who were cruel and tortured and short life expectancy and unhappiness down in Cuba, kicked out. They want to return. The ones that worked with Batista before Castro came in. The Vietnamese with its Premier Key, who was forced to leave, or the Taiwanese, the Chiang Kai-shek family that had to leave China, infested with poverty and dope. They somehow think that they're still able to rule the world, even though they messed up their country so bad that there was this violent revolution. And the Solidarists worked with Reinhard Gehlen, Hitler's chief of intelligence, and formed Permindex. They were part of Permindrex. These people had excesses of torture, killing, narcotics. They were kicked out of their countries, and they form individual armies that work to try and get a war going against the Soviet Union so they can literally be put back on their throne. So, as I say, there's the think tanks, the deposed refugees, the United States intelligence that works with British intelligence and the Vatican, the World Anti-Communist League, which is a link of a lot of people who are using death squads. They were set up by Otto Skorzeny, Hitler Skorzeny, and Stefano Della Calle, melding with Reverend Moon and the religious right. Moon goes under the religious right group also. And our veterans of wars who lost, who want to avenge the fact that they lost, they would have been proud to win if they could have turned these countries into pavement. The corporate role in altering the way countries exist, such as Mr. McCone of ITT, John McCone, who he was once director of the Central Intelligence Agency, who didn't like Allende, wanted Mr. Pinochet in Chile, so they have their corporate spies, and they make corporate money off of keeping the wages for copper workers down low. So the religious right, the mafia and drug connections, the Klan and the Nazis, the crazy one, the banking and the law firms, all of these various groups all work together, about 12 of them that I just named here as examples. Now, why do these seemingly separate groups get along so well? The common denominator that I can see between all of them, there's 2 common denominators. One is they want a Christian world. They are avowedly Christian. And the second is that they want war with Russia. They don't want to coexist with Russia at all. They want to wipe out what appears to be the evil empire, because when Karl Marx said religion is the opiate of the people, you take away the excuse for the fighting and for the activity if you take away the religious goal. I think that I put it in simplified terms, but I think that those are the 2 common denominators. There is the money profit. There's always money and profit. I guess you'd say that is one of the motives, but beyond money, there's people doing very terrible things that don't make a lot of money at it. And I think they have believed through their childhood upbringing, through the pastor, the church, the teacher, and the parents, that it should be a Christian world, and they want a Christian world, and they don't want the Soviet Union, and so they're willing to do anything to not have to coexist with the Soviet Union. And as a result, they're leading us right into World War III. The plans were set a long time ago, within hours of World War II, and it's certainly after World War I, the rearming of Germany began very rapidly. So this is their goal, and I can't see a day that they don't get closer to it with their government contracts and their strategies and the placement of troops all over the world. So in the past year, it's taken a lot of time to think about these separate groups, but they've become very clear in my mind, and it is a source of satisfaction to take just about any news event or article and put it into one of these categories and see where it fits and the people involved, how they relate to the other segments of this puzzle. There is an overall picture. The view is quite clear, and I'm satisfied that it's come out. I don't like the way it came out, but I'm satisfied that it fits so well together. We'll take a 1-minute break now and then get on to some more news that's important in the newspaper this week, and then we begin another new year. Good evening. This is Mae Brussell. This is side 2 of broadcast number 682, December the 31st, 1984. When I spoke of these 14 larger categories, I avoided mentioning particular names that fit into that picture. Every week on these broadcasts, I share names with you of particular people doing things that I think are usually horrendous in terms of crimes and the cover-up of crimes. And they fit into, out of the 14 categories, maybe 6 or 10 overlapping different categories. They jump from one to the other, and that is the point about the particular segments of where they fit in, that they play many roles, and that you can't put them into one particular section, such as John J. McCloy just isn't a corporate lawyer or a CIA lawyer. He fits into all these other segments, and that's why when I did the Larry McDonald Pies, I say, when I talk about a particular thing and I refer to a person's background and jump from these different categories, you can have a pretty good idea now if you put this little puzzle in front of you or learn to put it together after you cut it apart and play with it. Then I can run down some of these categories and you'll see where they fit. On the anniversary of John Kennedy's assassination just this past November, Joseph Kraft, the columnist, had an article that was particularly offensive to me. It was in the Washington Post and the Monterey Herald, its syndicated column, titled "A Wound That Is Healed." This is Joseph Kraft, and he made note of the fact that there was no public ceremony this time for the anniversary of Kennedy's death, that the last funeral was last year when Ronald Reagan attended services with members of the Kennedy family. That officially became what he called, sarcastically, the last funeral. He said, "Time serves as the great obliterator. Bitterness has faded away, and no serious person can now believe the legend of Camelot. Genuine achievements of Kennedy's can stand out. Ronald Reagan calls attention to them," and then he quotes Mr. Tocqueville, the Frenchman, who once observed that a nation can die from knowing too much history. What Joseph Kraft doesn't say is that a nation can die from not studying history. He says it dies from knowing too much history. Kraft went on, "One of our national blessings is putting the past behind us. Aren't we lucky? This is a great blessing of ours. We put the past behind us." He said the burden of Kennedy years was particularly hard to bear, so now the load is a little lighter. We can all heave a sigh of relief. My comment to Joseph Kraft is that as long as the people who killed John Kennedy are out there on the streets and used that coup d'etat in this country to set up those 14 categories that I just listed for you, or use those categories, or was employed as part of that operation, you cannot breathe a sigh of relief. You should be eternally vigil. And the time of being vigil is actually over. It's been 21 years, and I use the broad, literal you out there, whoever is listening, not individually, have sat around on wishful dreams, thinking these matters would take care of themselves. And this cancer, and you see the sheet of those categories, if you subscribe to the tapes, you've heard me mention them now on the air, this is a multi-headed cancer in the United States, and anyone in their right mind would never breathe a sigh of relief. Ronald Reagan was on the Rockefeller Committee and covered up the murder. Gerald Ford was on the Warren Commission and covered up the murder. Richard Nixon was the apparent heir, and these people killed so that he could become president of the United States. They wanted to be in 1960. Richard Helms is alive. James Angleton is alive. John McCloy, John McCone, Theodore Shackley, Henry Kissinger, David Rockefeller. They all know that Kennedy was murdered, and they wanted that. And members of the Vatican, Cardinal Spellman is dead, but people in the Vatican didn't want the policies of John Kennedy. They didn't want existence with the Soviet Union. Some are dead and some are alive, and as long as these people lie to you about who killed John Kennedy and take the profits from that murder for their particular purposes or to control the world, don't think that your load is now a little lighter. That's one of the things you could do. You could write to Washington Post, to Joseph Kraft. I'll give you suggestions if you want to become an activist. Your homework assignment for this week is to say, how dare you say that nations die from knowing too much. This country is dying because it doesn't know the truth. And everything that's happening here that I've listed and figured out, that I've run down very quickly for you just at the top level, scratching the surface, comes from your not knowing enough of your history. And I'm sick and tired of these Joseph Krafts and their smug ideas about the way history should be run. He not only wrote that article, but then pertinent to an important subject that figures again to that the puzzle pieces I put together. Joseph Kraft, just a week after Kennedy assassination, writes another column, and he wants us to forget again. If Lincoln was the great emancipator, Joseph Kraft is the great eraser. He's talking about Chancellor Helmut Kohl, who is worried. He's the head of the government in Germany, worried because the 40th anniversary is coming up to celebrate the end of World War II. And he flew to this country just a couple of weeks ago to make sure that Ronald Reagan have a policy or statements that did not interfere with the memory. He doesn't want too many people antagonistic to the memory of Nazi Germany. So Kraft writes this in the Washington Post, December the 6th. A chief purpose of the Kohl visit to Washington this past week, a week after Kennedy's death, was to argue for West Germany's inclusion in the 40th anniversary celebration of the victory of World War II on May the 8th. The Bonn government will be playing host to the economic summit of Western democracies. Isn't that cute? To have Germany be the host on the 40th anniversary. Kohl said he intends to visit a concentration camp. As a matter of fact, he bartered with Ronald Reagan. We'll both go to Dachau and acknowledge the horrors inflicted. I will acknowledge them. But, he said, they were inflicted in the name of Germany, onto other people, not us. But he points out that 65% of the people now living in West Germany were not even alive at the time of the surrender, and he wants to bury the past. Again, burying the past. Well, Helmut Kohl went to Israel just recently, and some people, survivors of the Holocaust and the concentration camps, approached him about this, and he told them, we want to bury the past. It's over now. We can't live in the past. And a columnist who described the meeting between them said that somebody brought up the subject of, why are we blamed for killing Christ? If the past is the past, why do you hate the Jews? These Jews today, 2,000 years later, for putting Christ on the cross. If he wants to forget the past, why doesn't he do away with the Passion plays at Oberammergau and this terribly anti-Semitic ritual they go through every year? Now, it's okay to bury the past, but the past isn't the past. Not in Germany, not today, not at all. Another article that brings that out very clearly is, again, this is from the LA Times, called The Flick Affair, a scandal jars West Germany. This was December the 7th, the same week that Kraft wants to forget the past. You may have been reading about the Flick Affair. It's been going on 4 years without too much publicity. This is the LA Times. It says, in the book, The Arms of Krupp, by William Manchester, he tells about the Krupp steel empire that's one of a kind, as if it was one of the kind. But as post-war Germany's biggest political scandal evolves and unfolds, there's a similar class family, the Frederick Flick family. Now, William Manchester covered up the Kennedy assassination and the death of a president, so he plays a nice role in writing a book on the Krupps, but no long treatise of 300, 400, 500 pages on the Flick family. And it goes into the fact the aristocratic, the Flicks began early in the 1900s, and it's the story of an unscrupulous entrepreneur who gave heavy contributions to the Nazi, funded them heavily. Mr. Flick was a defendant in Nuremberg at the war trials. He employed slave labor, as did our NASA scientists, Mr. von Braun and Walter Dornberger. He emerged from prison. Today he has a $3 billion business empire. He has a vast array of products, from toilet paper to battle tanks, getting ready for World War III. The empire continued after the death of Daddy Frederick Karl Flick in 1972, and is now under the control of his son by the same name. The Flick family is virtually unknown outside the country. They've been kept very quietly obscure, but now there's a scandal that's been going on, this says, for 3 years, almost 4. First, they evaded taxes by about $8 million by paying public officials $200,000. They took that bribe to get out of their taxes. And then there is the scandal of the sale of their automobile company, the Daimler-Benz automobile company that they had. A good hunk of that I had on a broadcast about a year or two ago. They put about $46 million into W.R. Grace and Company. The Nazi Flick family owns 28% of W.R. Grace, and Mr. Grace is telling us how to cut our costs domestically and save money, when his business partner and a good hunk of Grace comes from slave labor in Germany, and they would know how to cut the cost of paying wages in this country or anywhere else. Not only wages, but for housing, medical care, education, and so forth. Now, the Flicks, the father, had a 7-year sentence at Nuremberg. He joined the Nazi Party very early, long before it was fashionable to join the Nazi Party. He was one of 40 businessmen that helped Adolf Hitler, and the members of the elite Schutzstaffel, Schutzstaffel. It's a part of the SS, of Heinrich Himmler's SS. It was Himmler's closest circle of friends. Himmler is the most notorious person for ordering the torture and the murder of people. Heinrich Himmler was the person who attended the meetings with Mr. Flick, who gave economic advice and money to the Nazi cause by way of 40 different corporations, and one of the original ones was the Flick family. The father was released from Nuremberg prison by John J. McCloy of the Warren Commission, the High Commissioner in Germany, from the United States, and the LA Times has a part of the story. It says, in the 22 years after the release from prison, from 1950 to 1972, Flick rebuilt his empire and helped fuel West Germany's famed economic miracle of the 60s and 70s. Well, the economic miracle was put together by Wild Bill Donovan and the World Commerce Corporation, whose sole purpose was to rebuild Germany. We'll get to that in 1 minute. There was no economic miracle except that the Mellons and the Morgans and the DuPonts and the many, many corporations in the United States and around the world wanted Germany right back in business. So with John McCloy releasing the top Nazis, Hallmarschak and Mr. Flick and Otto Ambrose and Hermann Apps, the whole gang, they were back in business again. So the point is that Mr. Flick is now reaping in millions, billions of dollars, making weapons, arming for World War III, and then it goes on to say, among its many holdings companies, the holding company is the chemical company Dynamite Nobel, and they have heavy machinery enterprise, and it gives the names of some of their German companies, and it said about they have 70 other subsidiaries are visible in the United States, investment with 28% of W.R. Grace. Now, J. Peter Grace, through Mr. Milliken and his energy put up the money or got started the Western goals that was exposed to the Los Angeles Police Department, Larry McDonald, the computer with the names of law-abiding citizens to go into national, international computers of anyone possibly on the left or labor organizations or people complaining about police abuses. A big hunk of their money goes there. Mr. Herman Apps, their co-partner, is the banker brought into the Vatican to help John Paul II. And the scandal in Germany has to do with Mr. Flick buying the heads of the government, every one of them. They're under investigation. Several have retired, and more will retire. And it said, with the exception of the Green Party, the heads of the government in Germany are being exposed as being, paid. Politicians bought for the parties to run Germany, and that's why the missiles are aimed at the Soviet Union now, ready for a World War III, and this party is not dead. The whole point is that Mr. Kohl's belief that Germany is over, that these people existing today didn't live then, their children live. The Flicks had a son that went on. Fritz Kramer has a son that's in the National Security Council. There's a continuity lineage of children, fathers and sons and daughters, and they are continuing. Even Mrs. Karl Wolff is active with the Nazis and the intelligence community, even though SS Karl Wolff has passed away. So Mr. Kraft says, forget it, it's over. And the same week he says that, the Flick affair, which has been going on, is in the Los Angeles Times. And then the Washington Post had another story that week about the Bonn government going tense, about the Nazi surrender anniversary and the fact that they may visit Dachau prison. Bonn is trying to get the United States to assure them that when they celebrate the 40th anniversary at the end of World War II, they will make the lines clear between a democracy being put in as against the fascists being defeated. In other words, the gist of the press and media is already being written by the Germans of what we're to say, and that we are to be kindly to the vanquished, the victor to the vanquished, which includes Japan and Italy and West Germany. This is months, almost 6 months, 5 months away from the celebration, and they fly to the United States and use our editorial writers and our media and write the script of how they're to be perceived and how they're to come to the party. And then our American journalist tells us we should forget now who killed John Kennedy, and we should forget what happened in Germany, and everything is all right. And yet everything in the newspapers indicates that these people have had a continuity going on since the end of the war, and it began earlier at the end of World War I with the rearming of Germany. Now, a month ago on broadcast number 678, I was talking about the corporation that was formed, the World Commerce Corporation, that was formed after World War II was over, within a few days of the war, called the World Commerce Corporation. And they changed their name officially to that title April the 2nd, 1947. It had another name before. It was the British American Canadian Corporation in 1945, and then it became the World Commerce Corporation. And I referred to William Stephenson, known as Intrepid, the former head of British intelligence, and Mr. Donovan, the law offices of William Donovan of the OSS, and a Knight of Malta, representing and forming the corporation, and Edward Stettinius, Secretary of State, having an investment in the corporation, and I listed various people involved in that corporation. That was several weeks ago, and I also, in that same broadcast, talked about John Connally from Texas, the former governor of Texas, who was a member of the Permindex operation and close to the people of the World Commerce Corporation. Now, I came across that information in the book on Wild Bill Donovan called The Last Hero. Then David Emery's mind began clicking very fast, and he called me right away because most of you researchers know in the last years since 1970, I've had the Torbett document, which is the story of the assassination cabal. I've shared it with you over and over again on the air, and I just want to read you a few pages from the Torbit document. It's available from research from Tom Davis and Aptos. Chapter 8, Section A. The Trial Club, Tryall, in Jamaica, and the World Commerce Corporation. That's what the chapter is called. And it says the genesis of the munitions cartel. This is written in 1970, that was still growing. If you think that the resurgence of Germany or Nazism is dead, the genesis of the munitions cartel is found in the following quotations from H. Montgomery Hyde's book, Room 3603. It's a biography of the experience of Sir William Stephenson during and after World War II. After Stephenson retired as head of British intelligence, he moved down to Jamaica. In 1945, when the war was over, Stephenson had gone to live in Jamaica, and World Commerce, the British American Canadian Corporation, was formed in May of 1945, as I said before. He went down to Montego Bay. He had the finest house on the island. He was visited by several friends, including Ian Fleming, of the old the 07, Lord Beaverbrook, and so forth. List Noel Coward and some of his friends, Sir William Weissman. For a year or so, he didn't seem interested in the outside world, but then he began to get active. He had a little year off after the war, and then he began to meet with some of the financiers and associates of the past, such as Sir Rex Benson, Sir Charles Hambro in London, General Donovan, that's Wild Bill Donovan, whose law firm set up the World Commerce Corporation in Washington, and a number of Canadian and American industrialists like Edward Stettinius, former chairman of the U.S. Steel Corporation. So if you have any doubt that the Torbit document isn't talking about the same World Commerce Corporation or the British American Canadian Corporation, forget it. This is the same group. Stettinius was former chairman of U.S. Steel. He formed the British American Canadian Corporation. Now this is in the Torbit document that I've had since 1970. He formed that, and the Donovan book says that he had put up the money and that Stettinius helped it, and they developed the World Commerce Corporation, originally designed, this is what it was designed for, to fill the void left by the breakup of the big German cartels, which William Stephenson had helped, to win over. They destroyed him by winning the war. Thus, he and his colleagues on the board raised an initial $1 billion, $1 billion, to help bridge over the breakdown in the foreign exchange and provide the tools and machinery and the know-how to develop untapped resources around the world. The North Jamaican property was later transformed to Tryall, the exclusive club of John Connolly, Paul Radogorodski, and various people involved in the Kennedy assassination, including Albert Osborne, who allegedly was on the bus going down with Oswald to Mexico prior to the assassination. World Commerce Corporation received funds from the U.S. International Corporation Agency. World Commerce was set up in 1947 and worked closely with Clay Shaw in New Orleans and with the Trade Development Commission and with Permindex's World Trade Center. This is from the Torbit document. George de Mohrenschildt, that's the mentor of Lee Harvey Oswald, who introduced him to Ruth Paine. She got him the job at the Texas Book Depository, took him down to New Orleans, took Marina down to New Orleans, brought Marina back, was responsible for housing them and taking care of them. The introduction was from George de Mohrenschildt, and a number of white Russians worked for the ICA, that is the International Cooperation Agency, and they had a knowledge of the subject of who was behind the conspiracy. Volume 24 of the Warren Commission hearings, page 642, goes into information about Albert Osborne at Tryall, and that involved also Gordon Novell, who worked for Permindex. Gordon Novell, who is very visible these days, who called David Emery recently on the radio, and infiltrated and moved into Larry Flint's home when Flint was writing articles on the Kennedy assassination. Now, I was identifying from this book, The Last Hero, the way that Germany was rearming after the war and the role of Permindex in setting them up again with the Nazis that Joseph Kraft says behind us, and this part is from the Torbit document. Now, this brings up a very ticklish issue, the Torbett document, that I want to share with you, because there are people involved in the research quotes who have suppressed it for these past 14 years, and they really should account for why they've suppressed it. I met Sylvia Marr in New York City. We had lunch at the United Nations where she was working. She wrote the book Accessories After the Fact. I said, do you have the Torbett document? This was about 1976 when they were about to investigate the Kennedy assassination one more time. She said, no. I said, would you take it if I sent it to you? She said, I will not accept it. I will not read it. I don't want it from you. I'm not interested in who killed Kennedy anymore. And then she proceeded to be an advisor on the House Select Committee on Assassinations. I called Mr. Blakey, the chief investigator. I tape recorded the conversation and have it here in my home. I said, do you have the Torbett documents when they started their $6 million investigation? He said, I won't tell you. I said, tell me if you have it. If you don't, I'll send it to you. He said, I'm not interested. I said, but you have $6 million to look into who killed John Kennedy. And he said, I'm going to hang up on you. And he did. And he was not interested in the Torbett document. Now, in the same book, The Last Hero, on Wild Bill Donovan, on page 800, it tells more about the World Commerce Corporation, because now we're talking about what Donovan set up and the Torbett document, the whole framework of who killed John Kennedy, all in one ball of wax. And just a couple of paragraphs in this book, it said one of the elements of World Commerce Corporation was a commercial intelligence service. It would be a business and a spy work, commercial intelligence service, now operating as a private commercial entities with the overt purpose of preventing the economic collapse of Europe with Germany. And in that puzzle I gave you in the first half of this broadcast, I have the corporate role in coups and elections, and this is where the ITT and the Ford and the General Motors and the corporations go into the spying activity, also the Lockheed Group. On the cover, they are a business group, but as I say, they changed their name in 1947 when the CIA was formed, and Mr. Donovan, the head of the OSS, helped create this new CIA. They would use it as commercial intelligence service based on the wartime Anglo-American Canadian intelligence, as I said, and their purpose was to help Germany. The underlying purpose was to prevent Russia from getting along with Germany, from establishing the Russo-German hegemony, which could rise after the collapse of Europe. And they quoted a particular person who said as early as 1904 that whoever controlled Russia and Germany would control the heartland of the world, that combination would be terrible. So therefore, the World Commerce wanted to frustrate the chance that Germany and Russia would get along, and what they did was to set up a firm, the World Commerce Corporation, that one would submit offerings of raw material, supplies, equipment required to Germany to build up German production. Two, they would get bids for the production for commercial use, and they would find material available to export so that Germany right away could get into production. The Frederick Flicks could go right out of the Nuremberg prisons and begin their production, as did the Krupps, as did the Tysons, as did Axel Wenner-Gren. He wasn't a criminal. He was up from Sweden, but arming Hitler with ammunition. What they said was they would use existing plant and management facilities in Germany, that they were careful not to bomb, the IG Farbens and the various munitions makers, and it would be supplemented by material available and new equipment and raw equipment. World commerce was Donovan's only hope of restoring his fortunes to the pre-war grandeur. And the book goes on to say that he didn't make much money off of it. But what happened was he set up the framework for these various operations that work today with Nazis overseas. Martin Bormann couldn't come home, but he knew where the money was. He had set up 750 corporations so he could mingle them. They could use the money from the Swiss banks when Evita Peron died. The mingling of the corporations, the spy network, and the forming of Permindex, the operation that was behind the murder of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, that started the Operation Condor down in Chile, the death squads, the trained assassins that left Oaxaca, Mexico, and then went to South America and to South Africa when they were exposed, came out of these 14 heads of types of categories that I've given you on the first half of this broadcast. And when the war was over in May of 1945, the corporate levels were set up, and the whole purpose was to get Germany and also Japan, another, in quotes, enemy of ours. They were identified as using germ warfare, medical tests on prisoners, cruel tortures, freezing them alive, shooting them alive, injecting them with diseases. None of that mattered. We put them back in business. We funded them. We got ready to fight against the Soviet Union. Our generals wanted it. Our heads of states wanted it. And one of the processes of making the war possible is to kill those candidates that seem to be in the way of your general goals. They had their goals, and Kennedy was a candidate to be dead at the same time that they had earmarked other people, such as Patrice Lumumba or Pope John the 23rd. All of this fits very nicely together. As I say, it's an ugly picture, but in this past year, everything that I've studied, I can go back over the past and reread it and see the words, or I can read the documents I have, such as the Torba document, or I can take books that come out tomorrow. And now it all fits like a hand in a nice, snug glove. We have everything but the smoking gun. But the way that the columnists want you to forget about Kennedy, forget about Germany, and yet their murderous teams are combined more powerful and stronger than ever. Don't sit back and relax, and don't think that you die from too much history. As I said before earlier, you die from not enough history. Get it out, and the more you read, the better off you'll be. This is Mae Brussell. Have a very happy, good New Year, and thank you very much for many, many things that I've shared with you in the past year.